Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode we will be discussing Wyrd Powers introduced by the various editions of Necromunda. We'll discuss each Wyrd Power in detail, give our thoughts of the abilities, and explain how it can be used to help you to achieve victory in your next battle report. So these next few series of videos, we're going to get kind of weird. We're going to be talking about Psykers and their roles in Necromunda. We'll also give you a little bit of a briefing of what the Psyker rules detail in this game setting. We'll also talk about in quite a bit all the Wyrd powers that are available in Necromunda as well. We'll talk about each one of those individual abilities and how best to use those in your campaigns and as well as your games on the tabletop. We'll also provide our conclusive thoughts on what we think about this Wyrd power set. And because this video will be a little bit more of a deeper dive, I will put timestamps in the description box down below so that way you can click and navigate to the part of the video that interests you the most. So that being said, let's talk about Wyrd powers. Alright, so give you the rundown real fast of Psykers and Necromunda. First of all, willpower characteristic is going to be key because the lower the willpower score is for your character, the easier it's going to be for them in order to trigger these mental abilities off. Think of it, you basically take 2d6 and you gotta either match or beat the willpower score for your character. Now, about a 7+ willpower is going to basically give you a 50-50 odds of whether you can get your Wyrd powers off or not. You want to be more like in the 6, the 5, the 4 levels, so that way you can continually get your Wyrd powers off, statistically speaking, at a higher level. And of course, if you can't get that low with your willpower scores to either upgrading your character, you could also do so with some very simple actions you can take in the actual tabletop to help you. For example, every single one of these characters do come with the power called Maintain Control. It is a simple action and it's used for continuous effect Wyrd powers that you might use. All you gotta do, of course, is take a willpower test with a 3+ modifier attached to it. If you manage to beat that score, the ability still keeps on going, otherwise it immediately ends. At the same time, if you do need a little bit of boost to your willpower test, you can take a concentrate action with your Psykers, and what that basically is a basic action that adds +1 to your willpower test the next time you roll it. At the same time, you do have to watch out for Perils of the Warp. If you manage to roll Snake Eyes when you roll for your powers, there's a couple of bad things that can happen to your characters, kind of like miscasting for your magic in Warhammer the Old World. At the same time, if you have rival Psykers in the opposing gang, of course, all they gotta do is roll 2d6 as well and beat your willpower test. And they're able to do so, that means they disrupt your power and your ability doesn't go off either. Now, when it comes to the Perils of the Warp, however, like I said before, double ones is the way you actually trigger that event, and it can actually be quite devastating for your Psykers. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. Lastly, you have two types of Psykers in your gangs. You have a sanctioned Psyker, which is nice because you get to re-roll 1 willpower test per battle, which could be extremely useful. Having that ability to re-roll could be proved quite critical if a situation warrants it. Also, you have for most of your fighters, you'll have what's called the non-sanctioned Psyker special rule, which means if your character gets taken out of action, your opponent earns D3 times 10 credits in order to do so, because they're wanted, dead or alive, basically. And if they get captured, they can be immediately sold if captured as well, so you won't be able to get them back in a rescue mission if that does happen. And lastly, the coolest thing about these game mechanics, of course, is your Psyker's ability to access force weapons. Force weapons are actually just normal mundane melee weapons, but if a post-battle action where you do a sign attunement, if you actually pass that roll, you could actually add the power trait as well as a server trait to your force weapons, and that only works in the hands of a Psyker. So for those of you guys who are looking for some ways to make your Psykers even deadlier, may I suggest giving them force weapons. Alright, so let's talk about Perils of the Warp. Whenever you roll double ones or a double 6 when making a willpower test to perform a Wyrd power action, you might actually get the Perils of the Warp, right? So let's go and talk about what that ends up being. You end up rolling a 2d6 and you get one of basically 5 possibilities. If you roll a 2 to 3, you get what's called a tear in reality, and what that rule states is that the Psyker loses control and warp energy tears reality apart around them. Center a 5-inch blast marker on the Psyker. Any model touched by the marker must pass a willpower test or lose a wound or suffer driver wounded effect, and the Psyker then goes out of action. On a 4 through 5, you have the Immaterium Inverse. The warps inverts upon the attempting to control it. The Psyker becomes a target of power regardless of range. If the power is beneficial, the Psyker instead becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 6 hit that inflicts 2 damage, ignoring armor saves, and the power has no further effects. On a roll of 6 through 8, you get Whispers of the Warp. The Psyker's mind is filled with screaming demonic voices. The Psyker becomes subject to the Insane condition. Place an insanity marker on the Psyker's fighter card and roll d6 on the Insane table when they activate. On a 9 through 10, you get Warp Surge. The Psyker's power becomes overcharged with warp energy. The Psyker may immediately try to manifest the same power again as a free action, or if they're trying to disrupt the power, they may immediately manifest one of their own powers as a free action. This additional manifestation of the power can trigger Perils of the Warp as normal. After working out the effects of the power, the Psyker becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 4 hit, which inflicts 1 damage. And lastly, from 11 through 12, you have Demonic Possession. Demonic energy courses through the Psyker's body. The Psyker increases their movement, strength, toughness, as well as attack characteristics all by 3, and their weapon skill to 2+. The unarmed attacks inflict 2 damage and have an AP of -1. In the end phase of the following round, or if the Psyker generates this result again, they go out of action. So as you can see, some pretty crazy things can happen with Perils of the Warp as well. It triggers either on a double 1 or a double 6 when you actually try to do willpower tests before Wyrd Power, or when attempting to disrupt a Wyrd Power. So psychic abilities are quite nice, but player beware, there are some consequences if you mess up. So let's go and talk about the Chronomancy Discipline. So it's a little bit scattered in what some of the abilities are. It seems a lot of like a little random little things are kind of put together in this one discipline. But the nice thing about it, though, there are some really powerful buffs as well as defenses. The nice thing about the Chronomancy Discipline is that you do have a lot of dice rerolling abilities within this discipline. So if you're one of those kind of people who are cursed by the dice gods like I am, it's kind of nice having to be able to reroll dice in critical situations where you might need that to happen. At the same time, they also have a nice series of anti-psyker abilities that not only affect your enemy psychers. So if your enemies are facing a lot of psychers like House Daylock fighters, for example, or a lot of Outcast gangs, and you're finding a way to kind of mitigate those abilities that those psychers have, Chronomancy might be able to help you do that because of the abilities that they have within this discipline tree. So let's go and talk about the Chronomancer special abilities. So if you decide to fully specialize in Chronomancery, you do have an interesting set of powers you can use. It reads, if a Wyrd only selects powers from the Chronomancy discipline, they gain the Flicker special rule. Once per battle, this fighter may perform 1 additional action during their activation, which means you get 3 actions and a single activation for your fighter if you decide to use the Flicker ability. So this could be really important to use. Things like maybe moving an additional time, maybe in a really critical moment, or doing another attack like a fight action or a shoot action, for example. This ability will allow you to do 3 actions in that battle. It could prove the difference between victory and defeat depending on how critical this action that you actually make for your fighter. It's actually one of the most powerful special abilities, and in fact a lot of people just take this ability simply for this special ability that you get if you decide to specialize directly into Chronomancy. So that might be something you might want to think about, especially if you decide to take this discipline. So now that we're done talking about its special abilities, let's talk about the individual psychic powers. Alright, so let's talk about power number 1, Freeze Time, which is a double action to cast. The rules read, reality seems to thicken all around the fighter and events slow down to a crawl. Has time truly stopped, or are those caught in the power merely experiencing its flow differently? All fighters, friends and foe within 12 inches of this fighter may only perform a single action when activated for the remainder of this round. Now it is a double action in order to cast this ability, which is kind of problematic because, once you do this, you kind of expose yourself to being counterattacked unless you use it in combination with, say, using Flicker, for example, so that we can get that additional action in a really critical moment. But it is kind of powerful, and the reason why is because everybody within 12 inches can only do 1 action. So if you really want to limit what your opponent can do, you can isolate an entire area of the battlefield with this ability and stop people from taking multiple actions during that time period. Now, once again, the only problem with this Freeze Time ability is that it is a double-edged sword, because not only does it affect your enemies, it also affects any friendly fighters in that 12-inch bubble as well. And so that's something you do have to keep that in mind. So if you do trigger this ability, just realize that your own fighters will only have 1 action as well. The best way that I could actually see people using this ability is if you want to use this to stop or protect an exposed flank, in which case you would send your Psyker with this power by themselves to isolate that area from your enemies, and then send in your fighters to shoot into whatever is trapped within this warped freeze time bubble. That could be a really good way to use this ability. Otherwise, you really want to make sure that you don't do this near your fighters where you want to prevent your fighters from committing more actions. So that is something you have to take into consideration. Power number 2 is Suppress Power, which is a basic action to cast, and the rules read, reaching out with their mind, the fighter cuts an enemy Psyker off from their ability, as if they were never there to begin with. Choose one enemy Psyker that is within 18 inches and line of sight of this fighter. This fighter chooses one of the target's Wyrd Powers. That power may not be used this round. So once again, this power is kind of like a double-edged sword. It is very useful against enemy Psykers, which is very prominent now in Necromunda because so many gangs have access to psychic abilities, and they can cause a real hiccup for your plans if you're not careful. So because of that, all you can do is take a willpower test and you can prevent your enemy from using that ability. So if there's a really powerful ability that your opponent has, this could be a really great way to shut it down. The double-edged sword part, though, is that this fighter has to be within line of sight, which means that your Psyker must be able to see the other enemy Psyker before they trigger this ability. This could cause some problems for you, especially if your Psyker has to be exposed in order to see line of sight, so that's something that's not so great. It'd be a much powerful ability if you didn't have to have line of sight, like you're just kind of reaching out with the force or whatever to stop your opponents, but that's the only problem. The 18-inch range, though, is quite nice, so your fighter could relatively be within relative safety because of the longer range, but that line of sight is the only hiccup when it comes to this power. However, though, if you are facing a lot of enemy Psykers and you want to shut them down, this is a great power to use to do that. Now, ability number 3 is Zen Shootus. It is a basic action to cast this ability. It's also continuous effect as well. And the rule reads, time stops dead for the fighter, allowing them to casually line up a shot as if their enemy was standing still. While this Wyrd power isn't maintained, this fighter's ballistic skill is improved by 2+, and they ignore negative hit modifiers due to cover. These benefits do not apply if this fighter is firing a weapon that is either a Blast X trait or a Rapid Fire trait. So having +2 to your ballistic skill is great to use for shooting weapons, and this goes alongside with any kind of combat-oriented Psyker that uses really powerful shooting attacks in order to do that. Now, of course, it is limited. You can't use a blast trait or rapid fire trait, which I find kind of sad, but I can understand why they did that. Right? You want to make sure that's a single shot being used, not multiple shots. So I do understand what they want to use that for, but it could be useful for other special weapons. For example, long rifles would be extremely powerful when combined with this Zen shooting attack because you are attacking at long range, plus you take away all negative modifiers to hit anybody, which could be really great as well, which means you could also improve to +2 as well. So you could pretty much get a guaranteed hit so long as you don't roll a 1 in most situations, so it could be very powerful. In fact, Zen Shootus is actually one of my most favorite powers or ability from this list because you can use this as well. And when you combine this with Flicker, for example, you can cause a lot of pain by putting out a lot of shots directly towards your enemies, especially if your fighter has fast shot as well. Power number 4 is also a really powerful ability called Walk Through Walls. It is a double action in order to use this ability, and it reads, reality flickers as the fighter is in one place, and then as if individual picks have been removed from a vid feed, suddenly another. Place this fighter anywhere within 8 inches of their current position. They may not be placed within 1 inch of an enemy fighter. Now, this actually lends itself very well to a combat-oriented Psyker ability. What this allows you to do is allows you to teleport within 8 inches in a great defensive and offensive tool to either getting your fighter out of trouble, if in case they get surrounded by enemies, or to put them in range of combat to attack somebody. You could really use this ability in order to combine this with Flicker as well. So for example, let's say you have a Psyker who's got a really powerful close combat weapon, let's say has versatile trait on the weapon, for example like a chain glaive or something. You could use Walk Through Walls in order to get through a fortification or get to the opponent that you want to attack, and then use a basic action using that Flicker ability to do a basic action with that chain glaive and potentially use like an assassination attempt against your enemies. The only problem with Walk Through Walls, however, it is a double action, so you can't use it in conjunction with a charge. What you really want to use this in combination with is with that Flicker ability. And that's why Walk Through Walls kind of pairs very well with a fighter or combat-oriented Psyker in your gang. Ability number 5 is Mirror Image. It is a basic action to cast, and it reads, a blur of motion surrounds the fighter as if they are standing in a dozen places at once, making it impossible for the foes to pick out the true target. Until the end phase of this round, all hit rolls made against this fighter suffer a -1 modifier. In addition, if this fighter makes a retreat action, they may not be targeted by reaction attacks. The nice thing about this one, of course, it's got really great defensive abilities for the obvious reasons. You get a -1 to hit against if you're being shot at. If you're engaged in close combat, you can retreat as long as you pass your initiative test and your opponents can't hit you back. It is a really great ability to actually use this, especially if you decide to use this in combination with things like Evade, for example, which means your opponents are not suffering a -2 to hit against you. Or if you use this in combination with Evade as well as a Chameleonic Cloak as well, you're never going to be shot at when you use this ability. It's a really great power to use that. It's a good general purpose power for combat Psykers or for Psykers who you're afraid are going to be the target of many of your enemy's attacks. So it's another really powerful ability that you can use in order to protect your fighter. Ability number 6 is Lucky Aura. It is a basic action to cast with a continuous effect, and the rules read, little things just seem to go this Wyrd's way, each one seemingly insignificant but adding up to more than mere coincidence. While this Wyrd power is maintained, once per round this fighter may force an enemy fighter to reroll one successful ballistic skill or weapon skill check if this fighter is the target of the attack. It is a very interesting power because you can alter ballistic skill and weapon skill dice rolls at will. You never know when this could be critically important to protect your fighter from any kind of harm that might be coming at them. Now, unfortunately, this only affects combat situations and forcing that reroll to happen, and you do run the risk that your opponent might just roll well anyways, so that's a problem you have to face, but it is kind of situational, but you never know when you might need this, right? Something really catastrophic could happen to your fighter, and you might need to use this ability to save them. So, it is situational, but you never know when it could be coming really handy for you. So in conclusion, this is my overview of the Chronomancy Discipline for your games of Necromunda, and like I mentioned before, it's a very interesting psychic ability with some really niche psychic discipline with some of the abilities you can use, and it's a little all over the place and it's kind of random in some of the things that you can actually use it for. But in my opinion though, that also kind of lends itself to being extremely flexible. After all, you can use these powers based on whatever situation that you feel will be best used and utilized within your game, so that part is kind of nice. So it is quite customizable for your playstyle, whether you're running a combat-oriented Psyker, or you're trying to do like a Psyker that protects itself, or just a Psyker that likes to, cause problems for enemies and take away psychic abilities. It pretty much comes down to you and how you want to use them. So if I had to list these powers and abilities from best to worst, in my opinion, I think Zen Shootist is probably the best all-around ability. You could really use this psychic ability to really help you out to get those critical shots against your enemies. Things like using a special weapon, for example, like a long rifle, for example, or a plasma pistol could be really good use for this, or something like a mining laser. Anything that fires a single shot that it has a really critical moment for you, it could really help you out with that. So press power would be number 2. The only reason why I make it number 2 is because you do require a line of sight, but having the ability to take away an enemy's psychic abilities, especially now that Psykers are a real threat on the tabletop, this could actually really help you out as well. Mirror image is also quite nice to keep your Psyker quite alive, and same thing with walking through walls where you can charge into your enemies and then cause problems for them with either attack or a shooting attack, with a close combat attack or a shooting attack. Could be quite useful, especially if you combine it with Flicker, so that's something you might want to think about. Lucky Aura is quite nice because taking and making enemies reroll successful ballistics and weapon skills is always a fun thing to do. And probably the least useful one is Freeze Time, and the reason why I say that is because you never really want to send your Psyker out by themselves because they're kind of vulnerable. So having them to lock down an entire area where they take away enemy activations and only give them one action, it may seem like a powerful ability, but you got to use your Psyker by themselves because otherwise they'll hit their own friends and that can cause a lot of problems as well. So there you guys have it. This is my opinions on the Chronomancy Discipline for your games of Necromunda. As always, please remember to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. And if you guys have any other suggestions for some other psychic disciplines that you guys like to see in this channel, please put in the comments box down below. And if I like your idea, I'll go ahead and make a video about it. So that's good. I'm Commander Cheapskate. That's good for this one. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.